Yes, we have 5 functions of communication. First, it is the function to control one's behavior. Very good. It is the regulation or control. Second, it is the function used to produce social relationships, used to develop bonds, intimacy, relations, and used for giving and getting information. Yes, it is social interaction. Third, it is the function to motivate or to encourage people to live better. Yes, very good. It is the motivation. Fourth, it is the functions to convey information. Yes, very good. It is the information. Fifth, the function that facilitates people's expression of feelings and emotions. Yes, very good. It is the emotional expression.
What is speech context?
Speech context is the way that people use to communicate and transmit message orally or verbally. What is the importance of speech context? And why is it important to learn the types of speech context? The importance of speech context is when we put the communication in context. Context is critical because it tells you, the receiver, what importance to place on something, what assumptions to draw or not about what is being communicated, and most importantly, it puts meaning into the message. And it is important to learn the various types of speech context because it would help us fully understand why do we need to communicate with ourselves as well as with other people, and how should we act and respond in front of them.
Speech context is about the environment where the communication happens and how the message is relayed during the process. By knowing the speech context of a conversation, we can easily understand the message and we can make feedback clearly and appropriately. I have here some pictures. As you can see, there are 4 different numbers and 4 different images. Do you think there are connections between the numbers and the images? Yes, very good. It has a connection. The number represents how many people are involved in a communication. The number 1 represents the first image, the number 5 represents the second image, the number 100 represents the third image, and lastly, the number 1000 represents the fourth image. So, to better understand what I'm trying to say, let's differentiate the 4 various types of speech context. First, we have the intrapersonal communication. Second, interpersonal communication. And third, the public communication. And lastly, the mass communication. The first type of speech context is the intrapersonal communication, meaning communicating with oneself. What does this mean? Let's go back to the numbers and the images. The number represents the first image, and this is the intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication may be seen in situations involving talking to or writing to oneself, even thinking to oneself. To clarify further, talking to oneself may mean repeating a song heard while looking in the mirror, or memorizing out loud a dialogue in a play. Or even a teenager may write in a diary or in a private blog which nobody else is supposed to read. One also writes on sticky notes to remind oneself of things to be done. And, of course, there is daydreaming, meditating, or mental planning. Clearly, on intrapersonal communication, the speaker and the listener are one and the same. You send the message to yourself, and you yourself receive the message. And the second type of speech context is the interpersonal communication. The number 5 and the second image represents the interpersonal communication. Beyond intrapersonal communication are several types of speech contexts which we are more familiar with, such as interpersonal communication, which involves more than one person. Of course, it is not just the number of participants that determine each particular type of communication. They can be differentiated by its purpose. Remember, communication is always intentional. So, under interpersonal communication, we have the dyadic communication and small group communication. Dyadic communication involves two participants forming the dyad. One speaker and one listener come together to exchange thoughts, ideas, opinions, and information. The roles of speaker and listener are not fixed. They are interchangeable. Conversation is informal dyadic communication. Conversation is the most common, the most frequent, and the most popular of all dyadic communication. Talking with others is one way people amuse themselves. Dialogues usually happen during guidance counseling, consulting with a priest, or heart-to-heart talks with a trusted person. One bears heart and soul to go deeper into their motivations, attitudes, and beliefs. Interviews are almost always highly formal compared to conversation, but not as in-depth as dialogue is.
Here are some examples of dyad communication. First, you talk to your mother that you need an illustration board for your activity tomorrow. Second, your doctor asks about what you want to consult it.
The second communication under the interpersonal communication is the small group communication. Small group communication requires 3 to 15 people to study an issue, discuss a problem, and come up with a solution or a plan. This is not just a gathering of people with no goal in mind but to pass the time. The group has an agenda, a leader, and an outcome to accomplish. Because everyone can be both speaker and listener in this setting, rules must be followed to facilitate the order.
Order allows for a full discussion, which leads to a compromise and the hoped for result, a solution or a plan. Small groups may be divided into two according to its purpose.
Study groups and task-oriented groups are meant to look into a problem but not necessarily come up with a solution. It is the task-oriented groups that study an issue such as the perennial traffic problem of Metro Manila or the pollution of Laguna de Bay to come up with a plan to resolve that issue. Example of small groups are panel discussions, symposia, roundtables, and etc.
Here are some examples of small group communication. First, your group is pitching ideas for the research title to be presented. Second, your father told the whole family that the trip to 100 Islands will not push through because of the tropical depression.
The third type of speech of context is the public communication. So, let's go back to the image. the number 100 represent as the third image, or a public communication. Public communication is different from dyadic or small group communication, in that one speaker addresses many listeners, collectively known as an audience. There is no interchanging of the speaker and listeners' roles. Many public communication events are formal. The speech is well prepared. The speaker is dressed appropriately, and the listeners are set to listen to the message. Moreover, there is usually a stage, a lectern, and a microphone coupled with a sound system and sometimes spotlights.
Another example of public communication is when you deliver a graduation speech to your batch. You participate in a declaration, oratorical, or debate contest watched by a number of people.
The fourth type of speech context is a mass communication. So, as you can see, the number 1000 represent the fourth image. Always remember that the number that was given represent how many people are involved in that communication. Mass communication is any of the above human verbal interaction carried out with the aid of mass media technology. Mass media used to mean only radio and television, which reach more people with the use of their technical systems. With the advent of the internet and the World Wide Web, mass communication now includes social media, which for the use of technology by everyone, not just journalists, broadcasters, and technical crew. Social media cover videos that go viral on the internet, as well as the webcast, podcast, which reach millions, more than radio or TV ever could. In fact, radio and TV have joined social media by putting up their own website to communicate to a larger audience.
Another example of mass communication is when you are a student journalist articulating your stand on current issues through the school's newspaper. A professional sports team that engages in public relations, advertising, and broadcasting agreements. The production of live events that are communicated to a broad audience, such as a concert that is broadcast by internet, radio, or television. The publishing of books, e-books, magazines, and newspapers. Beyond advertising, other elements of marketing such as promotion and branding are types of mass communication. For example, designing the visual symbols of a brand. Static media such as websites, photographs, and videos. For example, a well-known photographer who shares their commercial or artistic images through a variety of media channels. And lastly, platforms that allow anyone to share content, media, and information with the public.
And we are done with the 4 various types of speech contexts. So, let's have a recap. What is the first type of speech context again? Yes, very good. The first type of speech context is the intrapersonal communication, which involves talking to oneself. For example, talking to a mirror, or meditating, or praying. And the second type of speech context is? Yes, very good. The interpersonal communication. It is a communication that involves 2 participants in a dyad or either 3 to 15 people in a small group discussions, a forum, or a brainstorming. And the third type of speech context is? Yes, the public communication. For example, a speaker speaks in front of many people using the microphone or the megaphone. And the fourth type of speech context is the mass communication. Mass communication uses mass media technology. This communication includes television, social media platforms, newspaper, and even magazines. This type of communication reaches millions of people. For example, a weather forecaster informs the audiences about the location of the typhoon. Now that you have learned about the different types of speech context, it is time to take the short test to know how much you've learned about the lesson. You will have to identify different scenarios under different speech contexts. First, what can you say or identify this scenario? Yes, very the mass communication because it involves Facebook as the mass media technology. Second, how will you identify this scenario? Yes, very good. It is interpersonal communication. Third, how will you identify this scenario? It is a public communication. And lastly, how will you identify this scenario? Yes, very good. It is a mass communication.
For your formative assessment, kindly scan this QR code.
So for your assignment, I want you to write 4 different scenarios using the various type of speech contexts, and you will submit this on our next meeting.